you are here for Who's Accountable? The Epstein Reckoning and the Future of Ethical Fundraising. So today we're going to just kick it off with some quick intros, the three of us. I'm going to set the context for the conversation, and then we're going to jump right into some panel discussion. And then we'll have some closing statements, and there will be plenty of time for you at the end to ask questions. But feel free to also enter them into the chat, and we will monitor them and try to get to as many of those as we can as well. Okay. So, my name is Tina Young. I am the founder of Impact Pro Tech. I am a 25-year veteran of the nonprofit world, focused on fundraising, some operations and strategy. I worked with some of you here on this call. And I launched my company because of that 25 years of experience. I realized there were things that the sector needed. You know, people like you on the call here. I wanted to find a way to help nonprofits accelerate their fundraising. So I have data-driven tools and services that I provide. Learned from working at local, national, and international organizations across a wide spectrum of causes, from very small and scrappy to very large and well-established ones, including Habitat for Humanity, World Resources Institute, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and the Asia Society, among a few. And I am a member of Chief, and we are co-hosting this event through the Chief app. So that's why you probably got the Chief Zoom link. And Pranya Haldapur is our amazing inspiration. She is the founder of Strategy, Creativity, and Mentorship. She has 25 years of development and management experience from US as well as international settings, and she provides consultancy. I know she's a strong partner for nonprofits. She's worked with higher ed, health organizations, all kinds to really get them ready for fundraising, design sustainable strategies, secure serious transformational support. She's actually raised over $300 million for organizations such as Doctors Without Borders, the Institute for Sustainable Community, Children's National Medical Center, and Mount Sinai Health System. And then Christopher Clinton Conway is the Chief Philanthropy Officer and Executive Vice President for Strategic Communications at the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute, but he's also a founder of Philanthropy CCC, his own consultancy. He's globally recognized in biotech and medical research fundraising, so very important context for the conversation we're about to have. He's been doing this for 30 years across philanthropy, nonprofit leadership, scientific innovation. He's been an advisor, to entrepreneurs, the industry, family offices, and a pioneer in venture philanthropy. He's set record-setting fundraising efforts at major institutions, including the Carter Center, where his work helped advance a global health agenda that led to President Carter's Nobel Peace Prize. He's also been the CEO of various nonprofits, such as the Joffrey Ballet in Chicago and the Tower Cancer Research Foundation in Los Angeles. So, as you can see, we bring to you a very deep and wide set of experiences. But I think the reason we came together was because there was something that we all had in common, and I think all of you who have joined us on this call probably have it as well. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Basically, in the last few months, as we all know, the Epstein files came out amongst many, many revelations. There was one that didn't receive as much attention, and that was his philanthropy. How much he gave, where he gave it, and when did he give it? Some of the most important, well-resourced institutions in this country were implicated, such as Harvard, Mount Sinai. NPR did a report on it, at least one of the more mainstream news sources, critiquing how these institutions handled those donations, because some of them knew, about the the issues that he had and still accepted those donations. Actually, and it was Pradnya who alerted me to the story. And we thought, finally, right, great. Somebody's going to have a conversation, a serious conversation about accountability, philanthropic influence. But sadly, that story and a bunch of others that followed really missed the mark. And so in response, Pradnya published a great op-ed in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. If you haven't read it yet, we will drop it in the chat. I don't know, Pradnya, if you have it handy, you can just drop it in the chat. So she did a really great job covering all the main issues. But we felt like this was a really important moment, and we wanted to turn it into a teachable moment so that we can help all of you and other nonprofit organizations avoid some of the perils and scandal that these large institutions had. So today we want to really give you a wide perspective because we do have a wide set of expertise and experiences, but we also want to make sure we give you some really deep tactical strategies so that when you walk out of here, you'll know how to address ethics in your fundraising practices. You'll have a sense of how to put together a solid donor due diligence plan, how to assign the right decision making and align authority to that role. And then we hope to give you some really good tactical takeaways so that you can go back to your organizations, figure out how you're doing on this front, if you could improve it, or if you're doing okay. And then hopefully you'll be able to have a much stronger due diligence practice. Anything I'm missing, Pranya, Christopher?
Just to say, and Tina, as usual, is being modest. What happened was that I heard the NPR article. I was literally just, it was a weekend. I was standing listening to it. I got really angry at
Yeah.
what I heard
And she
because there
texted me right
was,
away.
yeah, I did, and I got angry because anyone here who's known me for a long time knows the seriousness with which development practitioners. Uh, Consider their role in the fundraising, in the organization, in the protection of the organization, and in the protection of you name your content expert, right? And this particular interview, and then actually another one that I heard in both instances, the so-called experts were throwing the faculty under the bus
Yeah.
and suggesting that really what was required was better training of the faculty to not be dazzled or hornswoggled by billionaires dangling money.
Mhm.
So I did text Tina and then I wrote the op-ed and then I sent it to Tina. She was the first one to read it with the message saying, could you read this and make sure I'm not going to blow up my career by sending it to the Chronicle of Philanthropy? So once I had her thumbs up, that is when I sent it in.
Yeah. And that's when we decided to do this session to bring everybody on board. So why don't we just jump right into it? I know the three of us wanted to share some real world examples with you to give you a sense of where we're coming from and how we've approached this. I think, in this session, because it is recorded, I don't know if we can have a cone of silence per se, but may or may not name names, but just wanted to let you, Pradnya and Christopher, kick it off with some real life examples in these types of situations. Do you want to kick it off for us, Christopher?
Sure. Um, since we don't have an ethicist per se on our panel, and I'm an attorney, I'll sort of try to tackle those issues first off. And let's talk about Mr. Epstein himself, what folks knew and when they knew it. Beyond just how it affects communications and brand and reputation management, from an ethical standpoint, many people would argue that if Mr. Epstein has served a prison sentence and been paroled and finished that parole, then he should be able to make a gift wherever he would like, if that organization is willing to accept it. Because, as we know, while the outcomes often aren't what the prison system hopes, in theory, it's supposed to be a rehabilitation experience. Now, if the organization takes something and a person is imprisoned, so not having finished a sentence, and the organization wants to return that money, who do they return it to, right? Do they return it to Mr. Epstein, the person who has been accused and convicted, presumably, of doing terrible things? Do they give it to the victims who have been identified? Or do they keep it for their good work, presumably, and put it into the highest usage? These are all these are all questions. And, when you look at the few people who have written about sort of the ethical dilemmas around this, and ethics, as I'm sure all of isn't always logical. It doesn't always address the feeling you have, right? But what ethicists, I think, can all agree that, you know, um, a proactive, restorative response is the best one, right? So not just sitting and waiting for someone to find out you accepted a donation, or simply issue a press release and don't actually take any action. None of those are appropriate. But having open communication and, as we'll talk about later, written policies around these sorts of things. So gift officers, administrators at a variety of levels know what the institutional process and procedures are, and they can lean on those, right? So, yeah, I just wanted to kick that off. I had a real life example that I was going to mention in this first quarter, and that is I worked for a international development organization. And we worked with many people internationally, donors from 39 countries when I was there. Oftentimes, because the leadership of that organization was well known and well respected for their high moral and ethical standards, people who maybe didn't live up to that in their lives wanted to attach their personal brand to that person in hopes of greater publicity, a perception that they are equally magnanimous and selfless. So the example I'm going to give is that when I was there in the late 90s it was, and 2000, the Osama bin Laden. So that's choosing someone that really no one is going to say, but it's Osama bin Laden. So Osama bin Laden and his compatriots had bombed the World Trade Center for the first time using a truck and explosives underneath. So they had not leveled the towers, but he certainly made those threats, and he was not arrested or captured. He went into hiding. And we were on a trip to Saudi Arabia, and the bin Laden family, which is a huge construction conglomerate in Saudi, wanted to make a gift to us, not Osama bin Laden directly, but cousins, siblings, etc., from the company. But they specifically wanted it because they felt very bad about how Osama had used family resources to cause mayhem and death. And so in the end, we accepted that gift, put it to very good use in the region where they lived for health-related issues, so parasitic illnesses, terrible, terrible things. Was that the right answer? It was for us because we were able to anticipate all of these scenarios. And so, international law and events can make it a little bit trickier. We had a gift from Muammar Gaddafi. We were not able to accept that, for example. I know that's a very high-flying example, but it gives you sort of a real black and white discussion. So.
Well, I'll add to that, Christopher. I think that, at the outset, we mentioned Mount Sinai as an organization, Mount Sinai Hospital System in New York, that did accept money from Mr. Epstein. I don't know why we're referring to him so politely, but okay. They did accept money from him, but they took the route that we've been describing. They chose to self-examine. They chose to put that money back into the philanthropic ecosystem by giving it to survivor organizations and their own sexual violence program.
Mm.
But the flip side, same organization, right? Mount Sinai, different donor, Martha Stewart.
Mm.
Right? Martha Stewart is a convicted fraudster. I don't know what the right word
Felon.
is.
Yeah, felon.
Was she a felon? Yeah. But she continues to be incredibly generous to their geriatrics program. I, as a practitioner, right? They were my former employer. I was not involved in the Epstein part of this story. This was after my time, but Martha Stewart was in my portfolio. And I raise this to say, and the bin Laden example and the Gaddafi example, right? For me, for each organization, you said it, it's about deciding what is right for that organization
Mhm.
on two levels. One is operational risk, and the other is reputational risk.
Yep.
And thinking about, I always found it fascinating that the organization you mentioned accepted the bin Laden money because there may have been no operational risk or no reputational risk in this case, right? Because the brand of the organization was so strong. Um, but the operational risk might have been stronger, meaning that there's such a visceral response to the name bin Laden. Might there have been concern at a different kind of organization that other donors would move away
Yep.
because bin Laden money had been accepted?
Yeah.
And so, these are the questions that I think we've all had about these organizations that did accept the Epstein money, right? What were they thinking about in terms of the operational risk, the reputational risk? We've heard about Larry Summers as the president of Harvard. The Epstein files name actual professors and faculty.
Mm.
Why? Because uh, they were doing what we as fundraising practitioners beg our faculty to do. We beg our content experts to do, which is to engage with donors. And now they find themselves on the wrong side of media and the wrong side of history, maybe,
Mhm.
um, for just doing donor, like regular old donor stewardship.
Yep.
Um, so I'm grateful for this conversation because ultimately what we're hoping will come out of it is some insight into what every organization might think about in making those determinations for themselves.
And I would like to speak to Drew's point. Excellent feedback, Drew. And yes, I have run a couple family foundations in Los Angeles, and in both instances, while there were no criminal members, there were certainly members that had questionable behavior that had been covered by the media, and so I had, an account of money to see different projects, to do some algorithm bending and social media and media influence to really push them down and Google responses, allow them to appear at a food bank and how did I live with that? Well, I lived with it because none of these people had done I would more classify it as stupid and embarrassing things. And the money was real, and I was helping to decide where that went. And so that's what allowed me to put my head in the pillow at night.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In one example, a couple examples for me that kind of highlight the very full spectrum. A very similar incident where I worked at a nonprofit where a very high profile person, I won't name, it had an unfortunate traffic incident, and part of his penance was to do some community service, and he came to us. And he was a volunteer and then ultimately became a donor. But his incident wasn't so a lot like directly impacting the work we were doing. So we were okay kind of acknowledging that. And then on the far spectrum, I had another foreign policy organization that I worked at, had very clear, bright lines, red lines. We are not accepting money, not even going to start a conversation with people in these categories. And it was mostly governments that we knew for sure we weren't going to accept money from. And as a fundraiser, it was helpful for me because then I just knew to steer clear, right? Not even engage. But I want to jump into a little bit more the tactics, because in these instances, in your cases, there was a lot of nuance, and then in some cases it can be bright lines. But
Mhm.
how would you think about and tell others on this call about how you would begin to think about it? It's not a one size fits all, but it's really hard to have so many different approaches. So what are your considerations?
Well, I think you said it clearly, Tina, as a starting point, right? What do the gift officers understand? What guidelines are provided to the gift officers to the communications teams, to the um, content experts around what is standard policy
Mhm.
in that organization. What are the guardrails? And so, as a starting point, and I'll say this again and again, is having the guardrails and deciding within that organization what makes sense, what is values aligned, what is practical. I think we would fail this audience not to say this out loud, which is sometimes that's incredibly hard, right? I mean, the scarcity mindset in the nonprofit sector makes it really hard to even pause and think about under what circumstances would we not accept money. It's really hard, and the smaller the organization, um, the bigger a potential. A gift doesn't have to be huge for a tiny
Have
organization
impact. Hmm.
for the impact to raise the question and to have clarity about what is acceptable and what isn't.
Yeah.
And therefore, I go back to Christopher's point of each organization needs to make those decisions. And you start with the gift officer knowing what to pursue and what not to pursue.
Yeah. And but then it also it does some at some point it becomes very nuanced and very
Yeah.
individualized decisions, right? And I know the three of us talked a little bit about things to think about, like around internal culture and staff
Hmm.
capacity. You have to make an assessment, right? So we talked about staff capacity. Who are your staff who are leading this effort? What are the gift level thresholds, right? Are you going to apply these policies at this for every single gift or gifts at a certain amount? What is your risk tolerance, as you were saying earlier, Pradnya, like operational versus reputational?
Hmm.
And then who has the decision-making authority, the ultimate
Right,
authority, right? It's not even when you're referring to the news articles, not talking about the development staff. I
right.
imagine that maybe they didn't have decision-making authority, right? And so that's why they weren't included. And so
Well, I think
maybe
that's
speak to
right.
some of that.
I think that's right, Tina. And sorry, Christopher, if I interrupted
No,
you.
no.
But if we use Harvard as our example, I think that they're sort of at one end of the spectrum, right, in terms of scale and complexity and the points at which awareness could have been raised about somebody like a Mr. Epstein.
Mhm.
But the critical question that came to my mind was, okay, the gift officer may not have been in a position to say anything or do anything. Let's grant that.
Potentially.
The head of prospect research maybe knew some things but weren't in a position to say something. Um, but the question that I come to is, well, where was the VP of Alumni Relations and Development, the person who ostensibly is at that C-suite level in the organization? And I would argue it is that person's responsibility to say something.
Mhm.
And we'll never know. Did they not? I don't know. I'm seeing some great comments here in the chat about where prospect development can be in this process. So, you asked the earlier question. The gift officer is one piece. I think where there is the opportunity for prospect research, prospect management to be engaged in the process is critical. But not every organization has that kind of robust, uh,
Team.
support,
Yeah.
yeah, or manpower, woman power. Uh, but it comes back to what you were saying. Somebody needs to be the lens on asking these questions. And the more I argue, the more there is a solid platform, a solid process, whether it goes directly from the one fundraising person to the board in smaller organizations, as long as that is laid out,
Mhm.
I think that there's the opportunity for clarity.
And I agree. I'm just referencing the comments with Danielle Contreras, who works on my team actually. But working with prospect research departments, having them well resourced so that they're able to, pre-qualify folks. And then Drew and Valerie and Nicole all mentioned the Sacklers. And what I would say about that from an ethical standpoint that I think is interesting, and that is that um, where is someone in the hierarchy or the chain of command, right? So, for example, I worked for an organization that was headed by a person who personally, the organization had nothing to do with breast cancer, but personally, his three sisters had died of breast cancer from smoking. So no problem, no gifts from Altria or Philip Morris. Got it, written in the policy. I came back one day. We were headquartered in the South, Southern US, and I came back with a $500,000 annuity from two, 75-year-old people. They were lovely, and I had a tea in their little sort of farmhouse, and this represented, most of their wealth. And so I was telling the leader, and he said he was nodding, but he didn't look thrilled. And I thought, well, how could this not be good news? And he said, Christopher, what sort of crop do they grow? And it occurred to me they grew tobacco. And so he
Mhm.
said, you're going to have the hard conversation that we're not able to accept that. So those were not, billionaire people. They didn't have private jets or private islands. But, is someone who is maybe a general manager of a Purdue Pharma manufacturing facility, or if you've seen the movie with Matthew Broderick, Painkiller, they talk about the responsibility of the representatives out there selling the drugs. So I think, again, all of this can be anticipated and put into a policy, but to a couple of people's points, it's not always, Dr. Sackler. It can be a lot of people in the apparatus. Terrible things in history were never done by a single person, right? They always had, sadly, a group of people following them. So.
Yeah. And unfortunately, let's be honest with ourselves here. There isn't is it's not easy to find clean money, right? There's always going to
Mhm.
be something that's very problematic to someone. And so how you approach it, transparent you are about your process and your policies, I think is critical. Because if you put it all out there for the public to see, hopefully some of these donors will just see themselves out the door, right? They won't even bother. But one of the ways I land on this is how much influence are they expecting to have on your work? When I talk to a donor, especially corporates, not so much, foundations, but what is their expectation about how much say they get to have in how the work is structured, the outcomes, etc. And for me, that's a clear, bright line. No, no influence. You get no influence. I'm so sorry. But, you look at the giving levels and you can just potentially assume that, oh, if they're giving you $10,000, they are not expecting influence. But if they're giving you 10 million, they're probably talking to the president. They're probably talking to all your executives. Is that potentially an influence brokering conversation? We don't know, right? But um, it's something to think about. And in one of the organizations I worked at, we had a very broad set of policies and procedures for different thresholds. So if you were giving, I can't remember all the details, but like some below 100K, it would just be let everyone know about it and then raise any red flags, if we should be aware of anything. If it was above a certain threshold, then we had to execute a whole process where there was, a few notices. There was an opportunity for all the staff to participate. But that goes to what we were saying earlier about values alignment. This staff really they had their values are very strong, a lot of strong cultural identity. And so the staff were able to have input, right, into it. And it was a very expansive program, set of programs. So we didn't know what was going to touch somebody else's work. And so that's why we needed everybody's input. And then ultimately, it was very clear who made the final decision, and the staff would just accept, right? No matter what. So it wasn't perfect, but it was very clear to the staff how that worked. We made it very clear to all of our donors. So maybe you can jump off on that example. How have you seen other policies work in places you've worked at or not worked?
I want to mention, so Tower Cancer Research Foundation, which is part of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. When I was there, Cedars has a very uh, terrific security, privacy, very high profile patients. And so here's an example that I don't think the US government has ever acknowledged, and it certainly resonates with the headlines today. And that is when the Shah of Iran was under siege. They were locked in the palace. There were, groups of people out on the street. He was dying of cancer. And so, in order to receive treatment, and again, this was totally secret, he was flown by an American plane to Los Angeles, brought to Cedars-Sinai, underwent surgery for his cancer. And
Mm.
while some people, monarchists, are fan of the Pahlavis and the Shah, there is a very large group of people who are not and would say and cite very terrible things they did. Received the treatment, again, do no harm, and returned him to Tehran without anyone knowing. Because if anyone had known that he had left the country, it would have fallen immediately, right? So, is that right to provide medical care to someone who was largely regarded as a despot at the top, at the time? At a medical center, we believed it was because we were providing health, not allowing him to escape the country or some other, you know, um, morally repugnant, activity. So,
Yeah. How about you, Pradnya?
Sorry, I'm still thinking about the Shah.
Okay.
I
I'm
think
like,
that uh, no, because it was actually mentioned this morning in a news piece,
oh,
what
really?
Christopher just said. Yes. So
Oh,
an
oh.
NPR piece talking about it was a piece about, not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it was a piece about how the attitudes of certain influencers and decision makers in the 70s
Mhm.
are seeing themselves play out in today's relationships with Iran.
mm,
And among those being the person who was a real estate mogul back in the 70s and 80s, who is now in the White House.
mm,
Uh, and so in that instance, yes, you'll notice I try to avoid saying his name. Um, this thing, the choice to bring this leader into the United States, right, has continued to have ripples. But I want to actually point out a comment that Juliet made in the comments here. She says, "Agreed. This goes back to ultimate beneficial ownership, talking about American Cancer Society and tobacco-based organizations. But there's a nuance to that too. I think about this and I use it as an example all the time. Tina mentioned it. There's no pure money, right? If we want to trace back lineage and ownership, let's talk about the Rockefeller Foundation just for a minute, right? Where is that money? Where did that come from? How many generations make it pure again?
Mm.
And I think that, again, I don't say that as a criticism of the Rockefeller Foundation, certainly, and I don't say it as a criticism of organizations that choose to accept their money. What I'm saying is it's a repeat of the thing we were saying earlier, which is that individual organizations need to be thinking about their own structures, their own budgets, their own aspirations, their own values, and making decisions accordingly about what is appropriate to them and what is not. The example I can give you, is Doctors Without Borders, MSF, right? They are an incredibly values aligned organization. They will not take money from pharma because they hold true to the mindset that they can't accept pharma money with one hand and then hold pharma accountable with the other hand in terms of making vaccines and other medicines available in the global south
Mm.
and other parts of the world where it's needed. Now, that being said, and I say it here because I said it inside that organization, it raised the question in my mind as the practitioner, as the person charged with leading the principal and major gifts team. I asked the question, well, draw the line for me then. If we won't accept money from pharma, will we accept money from pharma foundations?
Mhm.
Will we accept money from the president of the pharma as an individual
Mhm.
donation?
Mhm.
And far more nuanced than that, will we accept stock from donors who choose to give us pharma stock? And the answer to some of those is no, a hard no. And some of those, the answer is yes.
Yeah. I have an interesting story on the tobacco industry. I worked with an organization that supported young people in advancing important policies such as anti-tobacco, anti-smoking, sugary drinks in, markets and things like that. And we decided at that time to fully embrace an inside strategy that we wanted to buy stock from a tobacco company because even though we knew we would get some dividends potentially from it, we knew that that was the only way we could get into the shareholder meetings. And so we would let the young people go into those because they were leading everything and the adults were just supporting, but that's how they got their voice. So if you're going to accept this kind of money and if it is
Hmm.
counter to your mission, then be clear about why you're doing it so that you can tell people this story. And it's like, yeah, of course we took whatever RJR stock,
Hmm.
but it meant that we could do this. It meant that we could have a say. It meant that we had a platform inside the company, right? And so, think about for yourself, for your organizations, there's such a wide variety here on this call, but how does it impact your work? As we said earlier, what is the potential brand risk? When I think back to what Epstein gave, I don't think the amounts were that significant. They were like, I saw like 150,000, which, I mean, I'm sorry for maybe there's some really small nonprofits here and that's a lot of money,
Well,
but for like Harvard, that's not a lot of money.
it
But
was
because of the
altogether about
brand,
9 million. It was about
yeah,
9 million to Harvard. But the other nuance is that he was also giving to small and independent
that's right.
private schools.
Right, right. But
He was
so
also,
so it's a
yeah,
scale thing and it's for you maybe 150K isn't a big influence, but the reputational risk was very high because it was such
right.
a public high profile figure, right? And so I think those are other questions that you all have to ask yourselves when you're doing this. But I want to talk a
Well,
little bit about it. You referenced it, Pradna. You mentioned the development staff. What is their
mhm,
role, right? And we talked about how to ensure a proper alignment with incentives, accountability, and authority, right? Sometimes those don't line up, and that's when you get
yeah,
real problems. Like if you're
yeah.
incentivized as a fundraiser, just raise a lot of money. I've been having a lot of conversations about accountability with different staff, and it is it's difficult to tell someone whose pay is aligned with how much they bring in, right?
Hmm.
And to tell them, no, you can't fundraise from here, you can't fundraise from here. They start to feel very confined, right? So it's challenging. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit. Otherwise.
Yeah, it goes back to the scarcity mindset that I mentioned, right? It's at every level of the organization, not just are we going to meet our bottom line, but as you said, and Tina's mentioning compensation based on amount raised. I mean, that's in larger organizations that have a bonus structure, but even in smaller organizations, when it comes to performance evaluations, what are practitioners, frontline fundraisers measured on, right? It's the number of meetings they had, it's the amount of money they raised, it's did they move a relationship forward with a potential donor? Did they bring in new donors, right? So if that no one is measuring, I'm going to repeat something Tina said that I thought was so spot on. Nobody is congratulating a frontline fundraiser for turning money away or for making the case that, a particular donor, whether it be a high net worth individual, a foundation, a corporation, um, that act of protection is not something that is tangibly rewarded.
Yeah.
And that to me, speaks to the underlying structure of how philanthropy is garnered in organizations. Um, there should be some notice, in my opinion, of frontline fundraisers, especially younger ones, especially as they're growing in their career, making the right choices, being values aligned, thinking about protecting the organization. Because at the end of the day, right, it's not even just protecting the organization, it's thinking about the money that they raise being of value to the constituency that that organization is serving.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, not spoken of enough.
Yeah. And Christopher, before you answer that question, I want to add a little tag on to the question about how tech and data can inform some of this process and how it can aid development staff. So what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a huge fan of what AI, well managed, can do for donor prospect and sort of relationship galleries. And so I think a lot more can be drawn and included in those profiles than ever before. And certainly having dashboards and things like that on your phone or another device that you travel with, you know, is vital.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it still goes back to the other question or comment we had about staff, right? Like it's okay to use the technology, like AI, but you need to vet it. You're right. You have to have a
Mhm.
human review everything. And it does require for that person to have a certain baseline of knowledge and
Mm,
skill in
yeah.
order to judge the quality of that output, right? And so if you have a very junior person doing this research and they've never ever sat in front of a donor, they may not know or understand what information matters and should be included or what shouldn't be included, right? And
Yeah.
on top of that, we have, and I think there's some organizations on this call who are international, and there's
Mhm.
not a lot of data and information available outside of the US and
And
global.
I would, I'm a hopeful person. And so I think in, 2026 and beyond, there is greater demand for transparency, and the sharing of information. I'll reference something, and I didn't get this pre-approved by her, it's not about her per se. So Jill Berry and I worked in Ohio, at different, arts organizations, at the time, both leading development departments. And Jill's was in Cincinnati, and mine was in Columbus. And one of the individuals that's been implicated, not arrested, but implicated in the Epstein, um, uh, sort of, what is it? Melange, terrible melange, sexually assaulted me at an event. And what I did, my response to that was I quit the next day and went back to the job that I had left. I hadn't been there very long, and I I have only shared it with very few people, and I'm not trying to be shocking here on this call, but that was 2003, and I didn't feel that saying that one of the largest donors in the nation, actually, based there, had done this to me. I didn't feel like it would be well received by the organization. The fact that it was another male and myself. So I slithered away, right? Humiliated, forced to move back to where I had been. It worked out fine. They were thrilled to have me back. But, today there is. It's not perfect, goodness knows, but there is greater awareness, and I hope as Epstein files are released, a greater reckoning for those kind of terrible, despicable acts. So,
Mm. Well, maybe this is a good segue as we kind of approach the end of our formal session, just to leave this group with some takeaways, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So what is your key takeaway, Pradnya, for this
Yeah.
group about how to transform this moment into something
Uh,
that can be positive?
Well, I would say that if your organization, whichever organization it is that you represent, if they do not have the things that we have been discussing, a solid process, a clarity around who the ultimate decision maker is, you know, do it now, do it yesterday, find it's hard in organizations, right, to stop the day to day and plan in that manner. But really, please make the time and seek the support and help that you might need to do that work. Because without that, every person in the organization, and they're all, I'm going to say, I'm an optimist too, Christopher. I think in every organization, everyone is trying to do the right thing. They just need solid guidelines to do so. And it would be surprising, I think, to the folks here, just how many organizations are out there that have not established a solid gift acceptance policy, that have not, drawn the, I'm going to date myself now, the Visio flow chart that says, these are this is where you start, this is what happens next, this is what makes it go to the board, this is when the CBO decides. As simple as that. If you don't have it, please make it happen.
Yeah. What about you, Christopher?
No, I mean I agree with all of that, and not to just support my profession, but involve attorneys, whether you're big enough to have general counsel in-house or an attorney on the board that maybe will go pro bono, because there are a lot of legal and ethical elements that you really need someone who is, an attorney to help guide.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think, on the specific languages need to be in the agreements, right?
Yeah.
If it's a very large gift, you hopefully have a gift acceptance agreement that you sign with the donor so they understand, as we said earlier, there should be a clause around influence. There should be a
Yeah.
clause around morality.
Hmm.
So really have a hard conversation about that and do it now. Don't wait for the crisis,
Yeah.
right? We haven't given you the template, but we've given you a roadmap, a direction to go in. And so, what I heard from the two of you is plan it now. Don't wait for the crisis. Get
Mhm.
expert advice. Don't cheap out. Make sure you have a good lawyer available to you. They could be on your board. That's one way to do it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then loop everyone in. Make sure
Yeah.
every single person in your organization understands it and that the expectations are clear about who has what role and responsibility and accountability. So we'll leave it at that for the formal
Yeah.
presentation, but I now we can open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions, you can either drop it in the chat or raise your hand so we can call on you. I wasn't able to monitor the chat. Were there any outstanding questions from there that we didn't touch on?
No, I think we're
Yeah.
seeing just a lot of great commentary
Mhm.
and examples. And I will say, Valerie, your commentary here about the process, I think, is really illuminating. Um, Fundraisers propose names, which get reviewed and then get elevated for higher level discussion, and final decisions are documented. Valerie, if you want to, give us some more detail around that.
Well, hi everybody. Thanks for that. My colleague Manu is also online. He's our legal counsel. I arrived at Orbis in 2023 to an already existing policy that he and I continue to work on and adapt around. But we definitely have, if I may say, we have a pretty solid place in mind, and we have the MSF background, Pradya, um, together. But we are much smaller than MSF. However, we have a very solid, I think, very solid policy in place that really makes it so everybody's aware of their role, right? Which I think is key. And we review it, but we remind folks again, you have to, if you're going to go after a certain gift, you have to float their name. We have to vet them. We do repeat vetting. We have all the tools that I'm sure many people here have, which is the classic Google Alert. So we know we're pinged. We are starting to use more AI. So really using those tools. And again, having clear communications up and down the chain. So if something is an orange, definitely a red flag. But an orange flag too is, hey, I need to pull Manu in here in this discussion just because our policy prescribes that. But we have to have a place where we can elevate it if need be. So,
Yeah. I'm curious to
okay.
hear if there's anybody on this call who's facing something very right now that's a challenge. If you want to share and we can help you, you know, workshop it. You have some incredible talent, not just on this panel, but in the audience as well. So this is your chance. Get some free expert advice. There's a lawyer somewhere on this call too, so a couple lawyers, sorry.
Everyone's either really shy or they've got it all figured out already.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, does everybody here think they have it all figured out? I don't think so. Yeah, even when I thought I had a solid plan, something always shows up, right? That
Well,
wasn't
and like with
anticipated.
any, board documents or other policies and procedures, revisit them quarterly or,
Mhm.
have a cycle for doing that. Because my goodness, when I advise organizations, I go in and they haven't even looked at them in 4 or 5 years, and it's really it's unfortunate.
Right. I mean, the philanthropic space, this is a really good point, Christopher, because we talked about technology as a potential tool, a potential, guiding path. What we haven't talked about is the fact that, AI is emerging everywhere, and people have, it raises the question, should a climate organization, for example, be willing to accept money from someone who wishes to give it as cryptocurrency,
Mm,
knowing the impact that crypto is having on the environment?
mhm.
Right? These are things that, if a climate organization wrote their gift acceptance policies 10 years ago, it was done prior to having to ask this question. And so, yeah, really think about it and think about where the landscape is right now,
Yeah.
right? Who among us would accept money from Sam Altman right now? I don't know. Some would, some wouldn't.
Some would, right?
Yeah.
Especially
And
if he dangled something big at you.
yeah, with
Hmm.
the OpenAI Foundation, I think there'll be hundreds of thousands of applications, including from Danielle and myself. So,
May I
Yes.
ask a question? You guys
Yes.
talked about the Rockefeller, sorry, my name is Michelle Hubertus. The Rockefeller money. I'm struggling with how many generations make it pure again. I don't know what the right answer is. We potentially have a donor who was a friend of Epstein, and maybe his children want to give the money, and the money wasn't ill-gotten. It was gotten in legal means.
yeah,
Hmm.
I'm struggling with how if I don't take it, somebody else will.
Hmm.
Mm.
yeah.
So I'm just struggling with how far down the chain I have to wait.
Well,
I
I
don't know
think
if
I
it's
think there's two lenses. So one would be from a communication standpoint. Any sort of implication may damage the charitable brand. But from an ethical and fundraising standpoint, there's a lot of noise around certain people that may never be charged and perhaps should not be charged, right? They were just in a business circle or a social circle where they happen to rub shoulders with notorious people. So I think if a person has not been charged and there's not pending charges or a likelihood of charges, and as you say, the money was earned, and it's not even maybe in the same generation as Epstein, I would see it as more than likely that that would be okay. Yeah,
Hmm. But
thank you.
again, going back to, first consulting your organization's policy.
yeah.
And then when that doesn't answer the question, because it might not,
It doesn't.
um, it doesn't, then engaging in the conversation,
Right.
right? And there's no perfect answer is the troublesome uh, thing. How many people have been named in the Epstein files that really, at the end of the day, have not done anything illegal? And
Yeah.
let's leave aside illegal, have not done anything immoral.
Yeah.
And so what? So we don't take money from the Clinton Foundation anymore either?
Hmm.
I don't know.
I think, for me, a litmus test that I've used is how would I be okay listing them on my annual report?
Yeah.
And I had a really interesting situation with a client of mine recently where they chose to list their donors, but they only used the first name and the last initial. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because I think sometimes people think that the donor list is for the donor, right? To acknowledge them, recognize their contributions, when in fact it's actually for the public. The public needs to see who you're accepting money from so that they can have a judgment about whether they want to continue to work with you, do business with you, donate to you, etc. They get to choose. But without that transparency, they don't know, right? I know a lot of nonprofits don't even list their donors anymore,
Hmm.
for the most part. I know it's not required, but as an ethical fundraiser, as someone who's values driven, I think it's actually really important to list them and be ready to defend. And if you don't think you can do that, then you might want to have second thoughts about accepting the gift.
And I would add something to that, because certainly in an annual report, you're allowed to do that, but you do need to list your five largest donors on your tax returns
At
now.
least yeah.
Yeah. And so that's just been in the past 5 years, and that is forced transparency. And when it came out, I've always worked with a lot of sort of secretive funders, not because they've done anything nefarious. They just don't want their name out there, so other people come to them.
Yes.
But that's no longer an option, and I think it's done much more good than it has done, bad, right?
Yeah.
And that's why people use DAFs and other
Mhm.
ways too. Yeah.
Don't even get me started on DAFs.
That's a
We
whole
can do a
other
whole nother,
conversation.
yep, we're going to do a whole
Right,
nother
exactly.
webinar.
And Tina, can I just say that particular organization you named, how much do I wish that they had a listing that said Madonna? She.
They actually, yeah. Well, I mean, Madonna can be a first name for some people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But I would just want to point to something Danielle said in the chat, which is that publicity recognition around the gift can also play into whether it's the right gift for an organization. So coming back to the operational versus reputational risk. And speaking as a practitioner, really what that also comes back to is, will accepting this gift be positive in terms of other donors wanting to align themselves, or will it be negative?
Mhm.
Will it deter others from wanting to be engaged?
Yeah. And I think
Can I say
just,
one thing? Sorry,
oh, sure, go
as
ahead.
a follow-up to that.
Mhm.
So we've talked a lot about policy creation, and I think it's really important, obviously, for organizations to have those policies. But I've experienced this where the policy was crystal clear, but the communications plan to the donor was not crystal clear, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so then it's sort of everybody sitting around the table saying, what do we do now? We can't accept this gift, or we're not going to engage with this donor. But what does that look like? So I would encourage those of you who are looking at your
Mhm.
policies, maybe renewing them, to include what that communications component is as well, and not just the
Mhm.
gift acceptance component of it,
Mhm.
because that's the hard conversation that nobody wants to have, and someone
Mhm.
has to have ownership over it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Danielle, and I can speak to a specific example, which is, I've worked in academic medicine. Yes, we will accept your gift, pharma company, but what we will not do is put your logo on the bottom of every presentation on every paper that comes
Mhm.
out of that center that you are supporting. We will, however, take out a full page ad in this journal thanking you once and making it clear to the sector, to the field, that we have chosen to align with you in this way.
Yeah. Well, I
And it is
think,
in the gift agreement.
yeah. And I think, Daniel, you're right. I think it's, and someone else in the chat said it, every single person has to be involved. This is a team effort. It's not just the fundraiser, although they should definitely have a role. It's not just the comms team. It's not just executive director. So making sure everybody is aware, and then input, right? Because they're going to see things from different vantage points, and that's good. That's important. Um, but I know we're at the end of our time. We could talk for a long time on this subject. I am so thankful to Pradnya and Christopher for being part of this conversation, especially Pradnya for kind of inspiring just the session altogether. And I think there's always going to be more to be done around this. And if any of you are interested in learning more, feel free to reach out to either any of us, and also everybody else who's been on this call, and drop their
Mhm.
LinkedIn. I think there's a lot of wisdom in this group, and you know that you're not alone. We've all been through some crazy situations. Maybe I know Christopher has more stories that he probably can't share in this call, but if you want to hear more stories, just feel free to reach out. But thank you and good luck to all of you. This is not
Thank you.
easy work, but it is so important. So you're taking
Hi,
the right
Cindy.
first steps. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.